everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Backline Unfiltered. I'm super excited and happy to have Knox with us today. I'll let him introduce himself in a second, but Knox was the guy that welcomed us into SysDig when SysDig acquired a policy. I reported to him throughout my entire time at SysDig, and he happened to be one of the best bosses I ever had. Go ahead, Knox, and introduce yourself.
I don't know how to follow that one, but I'm Knox. I'm a product manager at Google right now, working on vulnerability management, security risks, some threat detection. I was lucky enough to work with Eran and Maor for 2.5, almost 3 good years at SysDig, and happy to be here today.
Thank you.
Awesome. And we do have Eran, my dear co-founder, as well on the call. We're going to talk a little bit today about cloud and vulnerability management and shared responsibility model and how that's evolving over the years. Where do we want to start?
Let's kick off with vul management.
Sounds good. We've been reading a lot. I've been reading a lot about vulnerability management over the past year. I'm reading everything from what vendors are saying and everything from what Gartner is saying. And we see, I think more so in the last year, how vulnerability management is kind of shifting vulnerability management or risk-based vulnerability management into exposure management. And I think exposure management is definitely becoming, I think, something that many care about. Why do you think vulnerability management really hasn't scaled and needs to still evolve despite everything that we've seen over the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at exposure management and why it's becoming important, it's just another prioritization vehicle. So it just keeps on moving, where first it was, hey, how do I do discovery? And then how do I attach that to cloud risk and misconfigs? And then how do I make sure it's publicly reachable? But the heart of the problem still hasn't really been solved, which is someone needs to go and patch that vuln. That's where there's still open space and opportunity. And many people are just looking at how do I prioritize, but whether it's secure-based images, so there are no vulns, or having agentic or AI workflows, or building scanning into your code generation processes and trying to be free from vulns from the start. Those are areas that are open now, but it's really been a prioritization problem. And now I think the next frontier is, okay, you know what to fix. How do you go fix it?
I was at a very interesting event in San Francisco, an HSBC event, and there was a panel of CISOs talking about challenges they're seeing and unable to kind of move away from. And when it came to vulnerability management, to your point, I don't know what I heard was we're still mostly prioritizing. We're still mostly prioritizing because we don't have enough bandwidth to fix all of these vulns. And there was like significant worry, I think, across the room and across many topics that AI will just make the problem way bigger over the next few years between, generating new code that it's still not considered fully safe, or just bad actors using AI to find new vulnerabilities at a quicker pace, new exploits, and so forth and so on. Is that, do you see or hear some of these things?
Yeah, and I think the Verizon report backs that up with some of the cloud breaches, where for years it's always been stolen keys or credentials are what cause breaches. But this past year, exposed instances with vulns was a peer to that. And so that's what's driving a lot of this discussion, is like, hey, more workloads are being deployed as software in the cloud. And when that happens, you're going to have more exposed instances with vulns. It's definitely something that is becoming a higher priority now, because it's actually getting compromised. And so I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon, as there's more things that keep on getting deployed, whether it's an agent, whether it's the same app modernization that we've seen. And so now it's just, how do you prevent that from the start or remediate it as quickly as possible?
Yeah, we keep forgetting that, it's not just us, like software vendors that actually deploy stuff. Now you have all sort of people that have zero knowledge about anything, and they start, like vibe coding and deploying stuff. Um, and I was just having this conversation with someone who told me, like I had this whole thing written by, and like it's a professional. I had this whole thing written by Claude Code, and I just like supervised. But I mean, would you deploy something like that to production? Like it's sketchy.
Yeah, kind of similar. My aunt is a doctor, and she's a diabetic. And so she cloned some GitHub repo to help her insulin monitoring and things like that. And my brother and I are sitting talking to her, and we're like, there's no way that any of this is done securely, safely, reliability, and it's tied to her insulin pump. So there'll just be more ways for these types of things to happen for any person. And uh, I don't really know how you secure that right now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
at least two different CISOs at the event Wednesday said that they've used one of those platforms to build something for themselves or for their team. Like someone said, I needed to present at a board meeting, and I was just missing some stuff, and I just went and built it. And I came to the board meeting and like, what's this tool? And I just built it because I needed it. And to your point, it's a security person. They know all the risks, and yet the productivity gain sometimes are just hard to hard to ignore, hard to resist.
Yeah, I built a Strava app on Lovable, which is pulling and it can plot data and do all that kind of stuff. But my API key is in plain text, but it's a Strava API key. There's not that much risk that can come from it, and I
Sure.
know that's a problem.
Yeah, but you have enough knowledge about it to know not to put anything which would be too risky for you out there. Most people have no idea about that, and they will deploy that in a heartbeat and push in data that should definitely not be out there.
So
So it's pretty.
I heard a comment and had a conversation about it. There's point to be made, I think, about how many organizations are playing, quote unquote, experimenting, working on AI agents and all of that stuff. Probably a lot. How many actually deployed in production at a significant scale? I don't know if if we're at a point where it's significant. It could be over the next, I don't know, year to three, but I think from that perspective, the risk is still probably coming and not there just yet.
I think it's coming quickly. It's like all uh, technology curves. It's slow until it's fast, and I think this one is moving very fast.
Moving very fast. I think it's like to your point. This will be fast and then super fast. It feels like a cliche to say it, but it's probably true. It's the fastest I've ever seen, and I've been in this space since 1997, 8, and I don't remember anything moving so quickly. But that could be just my memory.
I have a funny question. It's not that funny because all three of us were in it together. But like after you've been doing like vulnerability management for so long, and probably like personally was involved in like redesigning this whole thing multiple times. If you had to build one from scratch today, with everything that you know from your past and with everything that you have right now with AI, how would you do that? And you don't need to give us a detailed design.
Yeah, I mean, we've all built this multiple times, and there's so many good open source offerings right now for scanning that, at least for scanners, I don't think you can go wrong with what's out there today, whether it's Trivy, Scalibur, and OSV.dev from Google, Sift from Anchor. So I probably wouldn't build a scanner. I would focus on how do you have predictable code generation with vulnerability context.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I subscribe to that. I think
Yeah.
that scanning is almost a commodity at this point. And it doesn't matter if you're scanning code or scanning hosts or scanning network or whatnot, I think you're at a point where the scanner piece of vulnerability management is almost a commodity. I do think that one area where I still see difference in quality is the vulnerability knowledge base, is like the data behind it. And I think some are better than others, but the scanning mechanics, I think it's commoditized by now.
I think it's worth thinking about it, by the way, because like we've been all doing it the same way for quite a few years now. I mean, since I think like Twistlock and Aqua kind of kicked it off like 10 years ago, it's been pretty much the same. And like maybe if we look at it in a different, I don't have a good answer for that. Like, and I've been involved in some of the same processes like the two of you have been as well. But maybe we should think about it. Maybe the process itself of how we discover is flawed to start with, because part of what we're doing, and I like I've been the corresponding HSBC Innovation Day that was here in New York. There's a lot of complaints around, but there's a lot of noise, right? Some of it is not actual vulnerabilities, like we know that agentic AI can solve some of that because like it will try to solve it, and it's not a question of do I have enough people to even analyze it. But maybe if we don't have like garbage in, then we won't have to deal with it. Then we can have other ways to handle it. So just a thought.
Yeah, you can either prioritize the pile or have a smaller pile. And I'd love to start with the smaller pile.
One does.
Is that because of bad scanning or bad data? I'm actually
A
I'm
good
not
question.
sure.
I'm not sure.
Uh,
Bad data where? On the coding side? Because for example,
one says false, like we know there is a lot of significant claims, I'll say, about false positives, right? This is not real. This is not a real vulnerability. So it's that like the scanner mechanics fault. Is that a data problem? Is that because it's a theoretical issue that is not really real in a specific customer environment or specific code because of reachability issues or things like that? That I think like because
some of it is
some will
reachability.
go to the extent of saying 90% of this is false positive, which feels like, I don't know.
They would say 87% and a half. I would believe them. Saying 90 is too generic. But yeah, I think reachability solves some of it. But like in some cases we've seen it's the mechanics of the scan itself, right? You rely on the fact that there is something that says, oh, you have this package, you have no idea what it's using. And then comes reachability that says, okay, you have all that and you're using A, B, C, D. But at the end of the day, even, like from a security perspective, and, like we've been in security for long enough, even having the package and then, like someone might be using dynamic that you don't see in the code and that utilizes that is an actual breach. And you won't see it because in the reachability will say, oh, you're not using it, right? So it's a double-edged sword saying, like, oh, you're not using it, then it's not an actual vulnerability. Need to think about all this. By the way,
It's still
false negatives is scary as well, because stuff that you load dynamically, you won't even know about it. And I've seen examples of how you can hide vulnerabilities that are out there and you'll never see them because, well,
yeah, it still comes back to it's too easy to build insecure software. And so this is where I do think ChainGuard has made a difference in terms of just like start from as clean as possible of a slate. And then within Google, we see more and more customers adopting things like autopilot because you don't need to manage the node. So that's the best systemic way to kind of go in and attack this problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I think they did a really nice job, and it's evident by the amount of competitors they're having over the last 6 months or so. But yes, I agree with the premise. Like, you need to start as clean as possible. And I remember, my very early days of let's have a secured Windows image for our data center, and how hard it was to actually build a secure image, and then B, make sure that whatever app you're running on this image can actually run, and it can't because it needs that service that you blocked or that whatever that the policy prohibits, and you need to go and open that particular one, and from one thing leads to the other, and it's a mess from a security perspective. And I know we spend a lot of effort just trying to manage this thing. So when I hear from you, like, people preferring to run on something managed because they don't want to, do that themselves, it just makes perfect sense.
Yeah. It will get you so far. You still need to manage it up because it will give you a foundation, which is great, by the way. But still, like managing it in the process and, like updating over time when, like there's an update to the image, all that is still not, it's a good foundation, but the process itself needs to be in place. And there's still work around that.
There's
Definitely.
a lot, but by the way, it's interesting. There is a lot of talk over the last few years about cloud being too expensive organizations because it's expensive. And there are even like few prominent VC voices, which I'm not going to name, that are like predicting the doom of the cloud because it's too expensive. And now customers are going back to build their own data centers because cloud is, that's the problem. The problem is not the cost of the, CPUs and network cards and whatnot. The problem is the operational cost, that managing securely and safely and at scale, and waking up in the middle of the night when something breaks. I think these are the real costs that in the end of the day just slows organizations significantly. When someone can take this problem off their plates, it's worth a lot of money. Obviously, I don't see the cloud being,
You don't see the demise of the cloud?
I don't see the demise of the cloud.
Not at all.
No.
Remind me not to be an LP on one of those VCs.
I'll share some. You will be surprised. They're very, very smart people that are obviously very smart, that think that in 10 years it will all go back to on-prem data centers. I don't see it happening.
I think that the concept is great because it gives a clear separation of like, hey, what is my problem as a cloud provider? What is your problem as a customer? The thing that I'm seeing change over time, and this is across clouds, like if I spin up an agent on AWS, it might spin up another service that's a Fargate container. Spin up something on Google and there's a Cloud Run instance, or there's a service that's then backed by a VM. You end up with the cloud providers doing more and more to secure your infrastructure, which is great. But then across the services that you use, there's more service dependencies. And it's easier to spin up services with dependencies. So that kind of semantic knowledge, the understanding of relationships, I think is getting more important, especially as you're spinning up more workloads, more services, more agents. And so knowing your downstream service dependencies, what underlying infrastructure that might be running on, is it my responsibility or the cloud's responsibility? That map has gotten more complex. And so I think that's an opportunity both for us as cloud providers to make that easier for customers to understand, and then also for external products to do that across clouds.
Do you think customers are aware of all these dependencies that they're creating, or is it kind of, it goes like under the radar for them? Or I know they know about the dependencies. I don't know if they know the level of complexity that it gets.
Yeah. I think you're always aware of it when you create the service, but then it's like anything, and the longer it runs, the more you forget about it. And so at the time of starting, it's definitely something where it's clear, hey, you're spinning up this other service that's backed by this, or here's this new VM. But if it's 2 months later and I'm interacting with an agent, I might not know that other service is still there.
And I think it makes, like, it's fair to say, just because you're saying agents, that agents will make it way worse, because I think it would be interesting to, like, I'm just thinking out loud, it would be interesting to see how this concept of what can agent use and rely upon, how flexible do you make it, or how strict do you make it? But if we're thinking we want to have a flexibility with the agents in terms of what they can do and data they can access, then this problem becomes way bigger and way more dynamic. When you are writing code that is interacting with other services, it's somewhat, remember or not, to your point, I agree, but it's still somewhat consistent. But if it's an LLM, it's doing one thing today, it's going to do something else tomorrow. It's impossible to predict.
Yeah, nobody knows.
Yeah. And I think there's identity systems and all those types of things that are put in place now to make sure those connections are as secure as possible. But back to it's in the code, that's the part that gets really complicated. Is like before you used to be able to look at a static resources config and understand what it can do, what it's related to. Like CSVM has been around for a long time. But if I'm building an agent, like that's in the compiled code. And so that standard like CSPM workflow that you had is no longer possible in this new world.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think identity will definitely solve a lot of it, but in the end, like I still go back to, it could be that some of these agents would just have, they will have permissions, but they will have a lot of permissions because they will need to do a lot of things. So it will be policy controlled, but just the policy will be too permissive. But yeah, it's just going to be interesting. It's we always go back to the visibility issue in security, right? How do I know who's talking to who and who's doing what?
Which also goes back very basics of least permissive, and like security is kind of repeating itself. Nothing is new. Just like we're applying it in different areas. If we keep everything and the visibility is there, then like
do we really see any new security challenge with these things, or it's solving the same security problems on different technologies and different stacks?
That's a good question. It's like, if you look at it from the attacker side, it's like, I want sensitive data. And so the outcome of what you want is still the same. So it's like before you might do resource abuse to mine crypto. Now you get a token and you use that to send spam text. So the end goal is the same, but it does feel different because the technology is so different.
I feel like two things that changed dramatically in the last, let's say, 10, 15 years that really influenced security dramatically is one is velocity. We used to keep saying it, like that when we started our careers, like 2 years ago. It used to be, like that people would release code like every, like 6 months, and it would go through security scanning and everything would, like security could, like pull the trigger and say, okay, you stop, everything comes to a standstill. That's no longer the case. So it kind of, like the velocity of development and release changed, like, and it means that you have to change the way that security behaves. And that's not new, but, like it's affecting even more now because there's more code that is being developed and, like it just goes up. The second thing is the scale, which also relates to this, right? The amount of code that is out there that you need to handle is also dramatically bigger. So if you used to have a monolith that would not change too much, and just in the edges you would add some capabilities, now everything is just like booming. And again, the end goal is the same. You want to secure everything has to be visible, blah blah blah, but like the mechanics of how it works is different. So it's not like history is repeating itself. It's I feel like now it's opening up like a big fan.
Yeah, I remember meeting with a customer at a telco early in the container wave. So this is probably 8 years ago now. And they said change management used to be my best friend and now they're gone. And I can't imagine what they would say today. Like at least you used to kind of plug into a CI/CD pipeline and like the shift left movement and all of that happened. But the part that's a bit more of a struggle now is like, where do you plug in?
Yeah. Anything that you
Outside of the
do,
code repo, there's not that's probably the only place where you can say, hey, I might have decent coverage.
yeah. And
I
even
think
that
we'll
is,
have to. Sorry, go ahead.
sorry, and even that is not enough, right? You'll connect to the code, but the code is not everything because it's running on something, which is running on something, which is shared responsibility, also all this stuff, like it's not Not everything is under your control, but you rely on it.
It will be interesting to see what will happen with securing the inference layer with AI. I'm just thinking the unpredictability nature of the attacks, right? Which you could potentially easily hide in the unpredictability nature of the underlying model. So hey, my agent is writing code now. That's fine. Maybe it's supposed to write code. Maybe it's not.
Yeah,
My agent
and
asked me for my credit card.
Anthropic added a new capability to agent called skills a couple weeks ago, and so agents are executing code and doing more things now. Like what an agent can do is going to increase, and so it's still early, but I couldn't think of a more exciting space to work in.
For sure. For sure. It's going to be very, very interesting. I actually think I'm going back to my own question. I actually think that all of these things will probably introduce new types of security concerns that we never had to deal with in the past. So it will be interesting. More stuff for us to do over the next 10 or 20 years.
We're so early on in our career, like Knox says that he met someone 8 years ago. We just started like 2 years ago. He's older than us.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Knox, for joining us. This was a pleasure as always. You still owe me dinner, which hopefully we can catch up on at some point. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone who joined in to listen for another episode of Backline Unfiltered.
Thanks for having me. And Eran, you still owe me a Reuben. So I'll see you in New York.
Okay, let's go.